Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top stories this hour. The King has thanked the nation's volunteers in his Christmas address, describing them as a selfless army. His Majesty said they are the essential backbone of our society. He thanked the hundreds of volunteers who attended his coronation in Westminster Abbey earlier on this year and said that their presence is a call to all of us to love and care for all.
On this Christmas Day, my heart and my thanks go to all who are serving one another, all who are caring for our common home, and all who see and seek the good of others, not least the friend we do not yet know. In this way, we bring out the best in ourselves.
Pope Francis has described the children caught up in conflicts across the globe as the little Jesuses of today, as he condemned the ongoing war in Gaza. Delivering his annual Christmas Day address from St. Peter's balcony in the Vatican, he described the attack on Israel by Hamas in October as abominable. But he also said that ongoing strikes on Gaza by Israel were reaping an appalling harvest of innocent people. Well, the Pope's message comes after one of the deadliest nights of violence in Gaza, with at least 100 people killed by airstrikes. Israel's army says that it's investigating one attack after claims from the Hamas-backed health ministry that many of those killed were women and children. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Red Crescent says that bombings of major roads is complicating efforts to help critically wounded people. Fire crews were called to the office of a Conservative MP last night after a suspected arson attack. Police are investigating after Mike Freer's office in North London was partially damaged by the blaze. Mr. Freer told GB News that the response from emergency services was excellent and luckily no one was in the building at the time. A 16-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a woman was stabbed in South London. Officers were called to a home in Bermondsey just after 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve. They treated a 22-year-old for stab wounds, but she died at the scene. GB News understands that the boy was known to the victim. He remains in custody. A man is dead and another in a serious condition after a shooting at a restaurant in Dublin. Police were called to the scene at around 8 o'clock on Christmas Eve and found two men with gunshot wounds. Both were taken to hospital However, one in his 20s died from his injuries. Police say they're investigating, but so far no arrests have been made. Well, it's officially one of the warmest Christmas days on record. The coldest place in England is Exeter Airport, where temperatures dropped to 12.4 degrees between sunrise and sunset. It means that those dreaming of a white Christmas will need to continue their dreaming, unless you happen to be in northern Scotland, where there are some snowy patches. And thousands of people across the country made the most of today's unseasonably mild weather by taking an early morning festive dip. Swimmers in Birmingham braved the waters in hats and costumes at Sutton Park's Blackroot Pool, and members of the Serpentine Swimming Club took part in their annual Peter Pan Cup in Hyde Park. The race has been held every year since 1864. You'd have to drag me there. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now, let's get back to Jacob.
England was merry England when old Christmas brought his sports again. 'Twas Christmas broached the mightiest ale, 'twas Christmas told the merriest tale. A Christmas gambol oft could cheer the poor man's heart through half the year. In this programme we're going to be discussing the origins of Christmas, where it started, where it began. We're going to talk about St Augustine and his visit to Canterbury bringing Christianity with Dr. David Starkey, who wasn't quite present when St Augustine came. And we're going to look at how it evolved, how the medieval mind dealt with Christmas, celebrated for 12 days. And then the Puritans came and banned it, and for some time it was a shadow of its former self, before the Victorians reinvented and restored it to its former glory, to the Christmas we now know and enjoy. And I'll be discussing that with Dr. Tessa Dunlop. But first, let's tread in the footsteps of St Augustine. Non Angli sed Angeli. It's the great line of Pope Gregory when he saw Anglo-Saxon slaves in the market at Rome.
I think we'd better translate, hadn't we? Not angles, but angels. Oh dear. Because, of course, in those days, there was slavery, except there were white slaves, and there was slavery under Christianity. So we have these handsome blonde slave boys in the market. The Pope's been told where they come from, and this new place, which is called England, from the Angles, because of course England is a new name for an old place, Britannia, the actual province of the Roman Empire, which had been one of the first to leave the empire. It's conquered by these miscellaneous German tribes, and pagan religion had come into Britain, England, with the gods really of Wagner.
And so when Gregory sends Augustine, having been inspired by the slave boys, St Augustine comes to the King Ethelbert and Queen Bertha, and her Frankish nature is helpful in the conversion of England?
If you like, you've actually got a sleeper here. She's a kind of sleeper. And of course, there were survivals of Christianity, the older Christianity. There were even existing tiny Christian churches, and there was one of them in Kent, St Martin's, where perhaps Bertha herself worshipped, and certainly St Augustine is going to use. Nevertheless, the place is pagan. It is a risk. They are frightened. The Anglo-Saxons have got a very legitimate reputation for savagery and cruelty. So there is a profound risk, which is why sainthood hangs upon him.
And St Augustine wasn't actually that keen to come, was he? Pope Gregory had to put quite a lot of pressure on him.
And once he set off, he was very keen to go back. You're stepping into the unknown. These are genuine missionaries. Bizarrely, England is like Africa. Roll forward to the 19th century, we send missionaries, ministers to Africa in exactly the same way that Gregory had sent them to England those hundreds of years before.
Well, we were talking about the origins of Christianity in England and Christmas taking over some elements that had been before. And then over the ensuing hundreds of years, it's enormously aggrandized. And perhaps we're in an ideal place to show that, because we're in a church designed by Puritan in a medieval style that shows the greater glory of God. And that happens not just to the buildings, but also to the celebration of Christmas.
Absolutely true. And again, I'm just thinking of buildings. We were talking about Anglo-Saxon England. Look at the tiny number of surviving Anglo-Saxon churches. They're tiny. They're simple. They get bigger with the norms, the elaboration as you go through the Middle Ages. As you said, the architecture moves in the direction of elaboration. So, as far as we know, do the ceremonies. But there's another point, Jacob. It's the issue of evidence. We are talking about things that ordinary people do. There's astonishingly little evidence. And it's only as you get really the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th centuries that the evidence piles up. You know what a parish does. You know from it, as always, it's accounts. It's where you spend money. But what I think is again very important to understand is in many ways how predictable the ceremonies are, and at the same time, lots of things that we think should be there don't seem to be. The biggest and the simplest, of course, is decking the halls. We all know about Christmas decorations. These don't come from Wilko. If it still existed, you go literally and you gather the holly and the ivy. There's some evidence that holly inside with houses, ivy on the door. In other words, the antiquity of the Christmas wreath, though of course it would not have been arranged, you know, in that kind of constant spry fashion, is very, very old. One thing that's strikingly missing, no mistletoe.
You have the 12 days of Christmas being the main part of the celebration, rather than we now have the build-up to Christmas, whereas Advent was more of a mini-Lent, where you were preparing yourself, you were abstaining.
Doing without food.
And that's right, and penance and so on, to prepare yourself for this great feast.
It was fast. Which again, of course, made the binge of Christmas all the more exciting. In exactly the same way, or rather the other way round, wasn't it, that with Shrove Tuesday, you had to get rid of all the food because you're about to go into the great fast that begins on Ash Wednesday of Lent itself. As the Middle Ages go on, you're seeing, and we tend to absorb the verdict of the scholars of the Renaissance, and we sort of see the Middle Ages as this darkish period. In fact, it's an extraordinarily complex high civilization. Like all complex high civilizations, it multiplies institutions. So you multiply colleges in Oxford and Cambridge. The Inns of Court in London get larger, get better funded, more important, significant people go there. Finally, of course, we haven't talked about what most people really care about at Christmas, dare I say, Jacob, the gift. But of course, the gift is not on Christmas Day. It's not on Boxing Day. It's on the 1st of January. And this, we were talking before about the survival of ancient custom. This isn't going back to the Anglo-Saxons. This is going back to Rome itself, because the 1st of January is the beginning of their year. It's also the beginning of the astrological year. The god of New Year's Day is the opener, Januarius, and he presides over this. And what you're doing, you're sort of bribing him. You are getting good luck. You are, of course, this is where, as it were, the social pyramid turns very much the right way up. You give up rather than give. We are used to the notion, yes, you give down, you give up. So the king will receive more generally than he gives back. So you get this day of high ceremony, and we've left out, finally, of course, Shakespeare's play, Twelfth Night, the performance of plays and acting. This is a time when they come in. Do you know what? We know very, very little about them.
But one thing I suppose we can see logically is that if you're going to have 12 days of holiday and 12 days of celebrating, you have to do something, but also you have to have it in the winter because you're basically an agrarian society. And people are free, that if you did it in August, everybody would be expected to be working, bringing in the harvest, working on the fields.
Or dying of plague in London. It's very striking. The ritual year of the church very largely is contained in 6 months, from Advent to Christmastide. And in terms, secular terms, feasts like All Souls Day, All Saints Day, 1st of November are very important, though less important ecclesiastically. The great cluster of feasts is the late winter, the spring and the early summer.
Leaving you time to get on with the harvest.
Absolutely.
And this then all changes. So people have got to this high point of an elaborate Christmas, the court ceremonial, all the way down to the peasant in his
Recorded
cottage.
with the invention of printing, you see, and the spread of handwriting. This is why we know about this, that this is the late Middle Ages is the point of suddenly the explosion of records.
And we assume that it has evolved from St. Augustine arriving. We don't know the speed with which it happened. We just know the end point. And then suddenly it's gone, that it's not approved of. The king wants to get rid of it, and that works its way throughout society.
It begins differently, with no specific attack on Christmas, but instead the upheaval, and what this church is about, this particular church, and indeed Catholicism in England as it's developed, is an attempt at restoration. It's an attempt at going back beyond this enormous rupture in our society, which is the rupture brought about, on the one hand, by the most extraordinary trivial of circumstances. Henry VIII falling out of love with one woman and into love with another, but invoking this most gigantic change of our society, and Christmas eventually is a central victim.
Now it's time for a quart of mead. But when we come back, we'll be exploring the effects of the Reformation on Christmas in Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So we've left behind the medieval era, the 12 days of Christmas, the great celebrations in Catholic England as the Reformation comes in. And we're here at Loseley Park, a house that was familiar to Elizabeth I, though she said it wasn't meet for her to tarry here, where they would have started with a Tudor Christmas. And I'm going to be told about this by the great historian of this period, Dr. David Starkey.
Thanks.
Well, David, we're here in the Molyneux Moor house built in the 1560s, the reign of Elizabeth I, but the estate had come, I believe, from the Master of Henry VIII's revels. What did the Master of the Revels do?
He supervised revelling and he provided the materials for revelling. And what's extraordinary about this house, it actually incorporates stuff directly from the court of Henry VIII, and it's here fitted into the walls, and you can actually see an HR, so it's designed to tell us exactly what it is. But of course, decorating with expensively painted panels is something that only the super rich, like a king, could do. Here again, the decorations of this table, using conifer, using fir branches, it's exactly what they would have done, though they seem to have preferred the holly and the ivy. Holly inside, ivy outside. Less use, apparently, of mistletoe, but I'm sure if they got their hands on it, do you know what? I'm now going to confess ignorance. I do not know whether you kissed under the mistletoe in the 16th century.
This is a Christmas that, if Henry VIII were to walk in, he would not be entirely unfamiliar with.
I think that's right. He would, I think, regard the fact that there was this strange stuff called pottery, which was only just beginning to come in, as really rather vulgar. One ate off gold and silver, but apart from these gestures of lowliness, he would have been relatively at home. Yes.
So, David, we're here in Loseley Park, which is perhaps the perfect place to discuss the transition from Christmas past to Christmas yet to come. That is to say...
To Christmas fading away.
Right.
Yes.
Henry VIII's Master of the Revels owns the property. It then gets built as a new house in the reign of Elizabeth I, as the change from the old medieval Christmas to eventually the abolition of Christmas by Cromwell is beginning its early stages. So what is that late Henrician, early Elizabethan Christmas like?
Pretty much what the medieval Christmas had been. Many of the gentry tend to be very conservative. Not all of them. Some of them, of course, are at the cutting edge of religious reform. On the other hand, the social pressures on them to keep up the old style of life are very considerable. But you can see it's quite a traditional new house. We're in what is really an Elizabethan version of a medieval great hall. We're sitting in the shadow of the, or indeed the light, if there was a little more light outside, of the oriel window, which would have illuminated the dais, where the family sit, and below here, in some sort of order, are the servants, and down there you've actually got still the screens with over them a little minstrel's gallery rebuilt in an actual later style, and doors going through that would originally have led to the kitchen and the buttery. So this refreshed is a medieval space designed for the communal world of the medieval household.
And that communal world would have been particularly present at Christmas when they would all have been in the hall, but with the master and the mistress of the house on the
Yes, we imagine so.
And the gift giving is to your senior, isn't it? So the Blackadder depiction of Elizabeth I desperately grasping gifts from her courtiers is actually fair enough, isn't it?
Well, it's reciprocal as well, but you do give up. And you receive more token gifts down. Elizabeth, for example, is notoriously mean, and she prefers cash. There's no nonsense about coming up, sweating hours coming up with an appropriate gift, particularly from her bishops. She expects hard, cold gold.
And what were the Puritans most keen to get rid of? You mentioned the penultimate night, the 5th of January, when it's all coming to an end and everyone's having their biggest celebration. But what do they think of some of the pagan symbolism, the bringing in of holly and ivy into the house, those symbols of ancient religions?
I think they're more concerned about the feasting. They're more concerned about the sense of the bacchanalian excess. Remember that's what it is. It's the Saturnalia. It's the feast in which the year turns. You escape from winter. But I think it's equally important that we don't overplay the attack on Christmas at this point. At least the attack on Christmas in England. The Puritans are those who take their religion seriously. And what they are keen to do, above all, is to honour the Sabbath. So Christmas, they're less fussed about because they don't regard Christmas as a serious occasion. It's not specified in the Bible. You're not told to commemorate it in the Bible. There are no rules suggested in either the Old or New Testament for its observance because, of course, it's an artificial feast. They don't get terribly cross about Christmas. What they're much crosser about is trying to enforce what they regarded as a proper, holy discipline on the Lord's Day. The attack on Christmas really gathers much stronger force as you get into the 17th century. English Reformation was absolutely a top-down. It's imposed from above by the monarch, leaving the monarch as either supreme head under Henry VIII or supreme governor under Elizabeth the Church. That is not the case in Scotland. The Reformation in Scotland was forced on an absentee crown, and it takes the form of full Presbyterianism, of full Calvinism. And there, Christmas had already been abolished. It had already been declared illegal. So as Scottish influence becomes more predominant, and particularly, of course, and this fact has been carefully eliminated from our consciousness, the earlier stages of the Civil War in England are a Scottish conquest. And part of the deal is that Presbyterianism is to be imposed in England, and Christmas, therefore, is to be abolished.
And what's so interesting about all of this is that there was a feeling amongst historians, and certainly as history was taught to children, that you have the Reformation and everything changes and everybody suddenly gets bored with altars and all the things that they'd believed for 1,000 years before. They no longer believe, they believe something new. Actually, more modern scholarship has said that there was a much longer process of change, and this fits in with that perfectly, doesn't it? It's 100 years of change before the Puritans get their way and have the different Christmas. It's not.
It's not like the Illuminations. You don't just turn them on and off. Yeah.
But I expect a lot of people watching were taught history in the way I was, and thought of it as school children as if the light switch had been turned and as if everybody obediently went along with it. So when Edward VI becomes king, they all become very Protestant. Mary becomes queen, they're all very Catholic again. Elizabeth I becomes queen, and they're all Protestant again. It's just not like that, is it? It's a much longer, more elaborate evolution. So much better being Catholic, it really is. No drink this time during this intermission, because we'll be exploring the interregnum, Puritanism, and the era without Christmas in Britain.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Turn out the lights, snuff the candles. Christmas is banished. That was what happened during the reign of Oliver Cromwell, but it didn't come out of nowhere. It came as a consequence of the Reformation and of the changes that that led to. It was a surprisingly slow process, and I'm delighted that Professor David Starkey is going to explain to us in detail how this extraordinary change happened, but also why it was undone when Charles II came back to the throne. You've built the groundwork from the 1530s through turn out the lights, snuff the candles. Christmas is banished. That was what happened during the reign of Oliver Cromwell, but it didn't come out of nowhere. It came as a consequence of the Reformation and of the changes that that led to. It was a surprisingly slow process, and I'm delighted that Professor David Starkey is going to explain to us in detail how this extraordinary change happened, but also why it was undone when Charles II came back to the throne. You've built the groundwork from the 1530s through to the 1640s for a feeling that a long celebration of Christmas isn't godly. If it's not godly, you shouldn't do it. You should be much more serious about it. And then Cromwell comes along and he formally bans Christmas Day. Parliament sits on Christmas Day. When I was leader of the House and we were trying to get Brexit done, I would tease people by saying, well, we would have to do what Cromwell did and sit on Christmas Day again, as you can imagine.
But of course, it's not just Christmas. It's the Maypole. I mean, the Maypole is one of the principal symbols of a kind of popular rebellion. But remember, they're very sophisticated about it. Again, they are fully aware. They hadn't listened to our first discussion on that, but they are very aware that the early Christianity had incorporated pagan custom. They knew, of course, that Christmas was essentially timed as it was because of midwinter festivals. They knew that the 1st of January was a day of gift giving because the Romans had done it. It continued to have its astrological significance. And all of these things which the early church had shrugged its shoulders about, by the time that you've got into this post-Reformation world, you don't shrug your shoulders about them. You say it's downright wicked. It has its origins in heathenism. We are fighting against heathenism. We are not compromising with it. The whole quality of the Puritan is the refusal to compromise. I remember my dear mother was a typical Northern Puritan, and I was used to say, she used the word principle the whole of the time, and what a principle meant, it was something I felt about so strongly I won't listen to reason on the subject. But these were men and women, we mustn't forget this, of principle, and they thought the behaviour that you were being charming and sweet and languorously sympathetic towards, they thought it was wicked, and it was also, again, it was self-improvement. It was associated with drunkenness, with licence, the things that actually destroy respectability, that destroy your ability to achieve economic self-sufficiency, prosperity, and so on.
And you were part of the elect. And if you were part of the elect, you had to behave yourself because although it didn't change your chance of salvation, you needed to prove to yourself you were worthy of salvation.
Yes, and even more, moreover, again, it's very, very similar to woke now. You think everybody else, because you know, of course, that your principles are the right principles, that there are no other principles. Everybody else, even those who are wicked, must be compelled to behave. So the machinery of compulsion, and it's very important we understand this, that the pressure at parish level, and remember, the better off have a very, very powerful hold on the less well-off. They control the poor law. They control the, as it were, day-to-day administration of magistracy and so on. The public humiliation of those who have been guilty of adultery or having a child out of wedlock, the parading in your shirt. Well, that means you're pretty well naked. It's very difficult for us to comprehend this, particularly the modern Church of England. With loving, caring, whatever. It's social discipline.
You've got your Puritan revolution, you've got Cromwell in charge, you've had a build-up of 100 years that allows you to ban Christmas. And you've control
of legislation and force and the machinery of the state.
You have taken dictatorial powers, you've expelled MPs you don't like from Parliament, you've been much less of a Democrat.
Parliament. Remember, the first thing that Cromwell does after cutting off the head of the king is to abolish Parliament. One forgets this, and you are never able to reconstruct any form of working polity from that point onwards.
And you try, and then you have Pride's Purge and all of these things going on, and you think that Christmas is evil because of its origins and because people get drunk and enjoy themselves in a way that is ungodly. So you ban it. But people don't take a notice.
Oh yes, they do. There is immense social pressure. What we forget, we had a period of military government. Cromwell was a military dictatorship. There were the major generals, and things are enforced, and they're enforced brutally. There is resistance, but there is brutal enforcement.
All the maypoles
are cut down. Organs are ripped. Again, we forget the sheer destructiveness.
The vandalism. But you can still see it of some of the great cathedrals.
Well, you can see it particularly at Ely. But again, musical instruments. The Civil War is a war of organs. Again, in the early 17th century, as part of the reaction against Puritanism, which is such a strong feature of the first years of Charles I's reign, Archbishop Laud believes in, again, we haven't talked about the beauty of holiness, the idea of ceremony, the idea of religion is essentially sensuous, of sacramental. In other words, that these are meanings too deep for words that are to be expressed by symbolic action. And clearly, if you actually believe in the sacrament, it goes beyond the merely symbolic into actual change and so on. All of that's there. And then, so you're putting back the organ, you're putting back the altar, you're sometimes even crucifixes, you're certainly putting the communion table to the east end of the church, you're railing it round, you are putting candles and candlesticks and all the rest. It's a period of astonishingly sharp changes. The early 18th century, things calm down. And those passions on either side diminish. There is an increased belief in rationality, in good sense. So everything gets rather flat. The passions die and the traditions die because, of course, the pressures for social conformity, the pressures for improvement, the pressures for a moralizing society do very strongly continue.
But this is in its way very satisfactory. You have the medieval Christmas, you have a long interregnum, and then you have a restoration which we, to some extent, enjoy. And we need that restoration in our Constitution as well as in our Christmas. Professor David Starkey, thank you very much indeed.
And a Merry Christmas.
And a Merry Christmas, one and all. I think now, some sweet sherry, we'll be looking at how the Victorians shaped the modern-day British Christmas.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've talked about the medieval Christmas and its excitements, the changes that happened at the Reformation. But now we need to explain how we get to the Christmas we enjoy. And that's come through the Victorians. And who better to explain that to me than Dr. Tessa Dunlop. Tessa,
Hello.
lovely to see you.
Today I am playing Lady of the Manor. And we've got a real treat in store.
Excellent.
Jacob and I have come to Eastwell Manor, nowadays a luxury country hotel and spa. But before it was rebuilt in the 1920s, this was an enormous Georgian residence where Queen Victoria's second son Alfred, the Duke of Edinburgh, and his family lived. With impressive royal connections, it was quite the place to be seen in the late 19th century.
And of course, in among the shooting and the countryside frolics, the high point of the calendar, it was Christmas. Let me reveal more inside.
Jacob, happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Oh, on
You
this occasion
won.
I've won. Now, tell me, Tessa, you are a great expert on the Victorian Christmas, which becomes the Christmas as we know it. Crackers are part of this. Where's the cracker come from?
Ah, well, this, dare I say it, is part French inspired. Don't let that put you off, Jacob.
I won't.
Would you like to take a pause for the joke?
I will. What does a snail do on Christmas Day? This is very good. I like this
Get
one.
sluggish?
It celebrates.
Oh, wonderful. Let me try now.
I think
Come
that's
on.
because it's been at the sherry.
So, the French part is because a confectioner, a British confectioner, none other than Tom Smith, goes over to Paris and discovers that bonbons are available, sugared almonds and the like, in twists of paper. So he runs with that idea and he attaches it to a cracker that goes snap. And by the later Victorian period, you don't just get a sweetie, but it's been replaced, in fact, by a hat and a small gift. Do we have a gift?
I don't think we do in this particular one.
They were quite cheap.
Well,
Am I allowed to admit that?
they're not provided by the hotel, which I think would have provided higher quality crackers. But what fascinates me about this, just the cracker is an example of it, that we think our Christmas is from time immemorial. All the things we do, all the things we take for granted are the invention of the Victorians.
They are. If you like, they turned Christmas into something of a religious part-time celebration. At the turn of the 19th century, most businesses didn't give their staff necessarily holidays for Christmas. That changes. By the middle of the century, it's been turned around, and we can give a huge amount of credit to the royal family for that.
Christmas starts in the Victorian period. Yeah. It's partly technology, it's partly bank holidays come in towards the end of the 19th century, but also it's imitation of the royal family, isn't it? Yes. They do it, and therefore everybody else follows.
Which is one of the reasons why I've brought you here to Eastwell Manor. When it has its big Christmas moment, it is the home to Queen Victoria's second son, none other than Alfred, the Duke of Edinburgh, not to be confused with the later Duke of Edinburgh, Philip. Do you want me to take this off? Are you finding it a little distracting?
It's very elegant, but not necessarily necessary for the whole of our conversation. Prince Alfred comes here. It's his country residence. He's here at Christmas, and his daughter, who goes on to be Queen of Romania, Queen Marie, writes about it and what was going on.
Yeah, she absolutely loved Eastwell Park. She wrote a best-selling memoir that was published in the 1930s. She was the daughter not just of Victoria's second son Alfred, but also the daughter of Marie, Russian Marie, from the Tsar Alexander II. So extraordinary royal blood. And she writes beautifully
of the import of this place, particularly but not only at Christmas. Their first residence, if you like, their city residence, but she writes here, the Christmas tree was set up in the big library, whilst the presents were laid out on white-covered tables all around the walls of the room. But what mysteries went on beforehand. And quite beautifully, she illustrates memories of being taken away by the servants, and they all get to stir the very stiff Christmas pudding. A bit like, I imagine, what happens in your house in Somerset.
Well, I'm not sure we're quite as traditional as that, but again, this is where royal things then spread. So the Christmas tree is in the room, the lit Christmas tree, and that was something that Prince Albert brought back into Britain.
That's right. So her grandfather, Albert, as we know, was a German. He marries Victorian. They introduced the idea of this Christmas tree, and there are illustrations of them, I think, by the mid-19th century. The family, the Christmas tree, this idea that the beating heart of the British Christmas is royal and it's also popular.
And it's constitutionally interesting, isn't it? Because William IV, the last king to fire a Prime Minister, Victoria has lost constitutional power. The Great Reform Bill has taken it away. And the royal family has to reinvent itself as something. What is its purpose?
Yes.
And its purpose becomes the idealised family, focused very much on Christmas.
Beautifully said. They replace political power with popularity, effectively. And there is Victoria. She's hardly a hands-on mother, but she does have 9 children. So it's very easy to get the appropriate photo op, which her children then run with. And we hear this from Marie, who gives wonderful accounts. She says, at last, Christmas Eve was there, and the library doors, which had been kept closed for several days, were thrown open. And there stood the tree, a blaze of light. And the best thing is, she says, one of the most indelible memories of Christmas was, wait for it, the delicious fragrance of singe fir branches, so inseparable from Christmas.
So you're burning your house down to celebrate Christmas, which fortunately doesn't become part of the more general celebration. We've got mince pies.
Indeed we do.
But we've always had mince pies.
Well, yes, but in Tudor times, it was meat. Perhaps this was the first vegetarian movement. In the 19th century, it becomes sweetmeats are more commonly associated with mince pies as opposed to red meats. And therefore it's safe for everyone to
No,
tuck
it's
in.
not. They're definitely not vegetarian.
And also,
all the best mince pies have lard in them. Everything in Somerset is always the best. Tip top, as they say.
would you like a little...
Let's go on a wander.
To the Christmas tree?
The Christmas tree. And we can sing a song to the Christmas tree.
It's rude to sing with your mouth full.
So, Tessa, this is the perfect house for another Christmas staple, the parlour games.
Yes, and of course Marie remembers it as a child, seeming enormous, the ideal venue.
Well, it's not small, as you can see from that picture.
No, it's rather wonderful, that, isn't it? Celebrating the new residence of the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. Now, this was a time when Papa very much came to life. Otherwise, he was a rare father. That meant not around very often.
Well, fathers are often busy.
Indeed, Jacob, some fathers are often busy. But at Christmas time, the Duke of Edinburgh played the ogre for his numerous offspring. I don't know if that...
Well, it's a worthy cause. Yes, I've always modelled myself from The Mummy, the 1930s film, and the priest is reincarnated. And I wander around like this, and the children would flee in terror. Daddy, Daddy, don't do that. But now they're beyond that stage.
Well, with these hallways, all the lights were switched off. And in those days, pitch dark was pitch dark. There was no sort of Wi-Fi glow in the corner. And she said it was properly terrifying. But of course, all felt much better when the doors of the library were flung open and the tree was a wonder to behold. And do you know what the best thing about the Christmas tree was back then?
You tell me. The baubles, the smell of burning fir.
Indeed, all of those things. But sometimes presents would be embedded in the tree. Oh, look, what do I have here for you, Jacob?
Here's one you prepared earlier.
Indeed.
Well, thank you very much.
Small gift.
Absolutely delicious, just the sort of chocolate I like, so thank you.
Initially, of course, on Christmas Day, just little bits of fruit, chocolate, sweetmeats hanging on the tree. And later on in the 19th century, industrialisation, little wind-up toys, bits and bobs, actually had to be laid underneath the tree because they were so prolific.
And it's industrialisation, mechanisation that means that affordable knickknacks can be produced and everybody can now have them.
Indeed, not just for royalty and those and such as those with large houses.
People like you, yes.
You took the words straight out of my mouth. Now, the thing is, if you eat a lot of chocolate, there's one other staple on Christmas Day that's a must, and that's the outdoor stomp. Marie was a great celebrator of the English walk. Will we take a little meander in the grounds?
As long as it's only little. I'm not a great one for extensive stomps in the cold weather. I quite like the burning fire, but a little walk to see the outside of Princess Marie's former residence, or the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh's former residence.
You mean you don't walk off your turkey? I'm shocked. Come hither.
Here we go.
Really, we should have Wellington boots.
Well, what could be better than this at any time of year? This beautiful countryside, elegant gardens, exquisite views. It must have been very happy for Princess Marie.
Yeah, it really is the best of England. And interestingly, we know she was hugely proud to be Queen of Romania, but always in her heart, she identified as an English woman. First and foremost, that's what she felt. And during World War I, she would always remind people, I have English blood in my veins. And when you come here, you realise why.
Yeah, but she did have any English blood, did she? It was all German.
Shh, we never refer to the foreign aspects of our royal family.
So you've eaten all your turkey, you're full to the gunnels, you've played your indoor games. What does the royal child do next with no TV, no iPad, and not even any GB News?
Heaven forfend. No GB News.
I know, can you imagine?
Unimaginable, but come on. Even you couldn't compete with these spectacular grounds. This was the great outdoor playroom for children. They put on their sable-lined capes and their little boots, and they kicked in the leaves and they climbed trees, and things that have since really rather disappeared. We know that Marie went tobogganing, she skated on the lake.
I've tobogganed, my children have tobogganed. All this climate alarmism is going a bit far.
Yes, but Jacob, you're very old.
I am very ancient. The impact history has on our lives is seen so clearly in Christmas Day. Of course, we go back to the fundamental principle that today a Saviour has been born to us, he is Christ the Lord, but we then see how that evolves into an extraordinary set of ceremonies, mainly not that ancient, but dependent on our Victorian forebears. Just remains for me to wish you a very happy and blessed Christmas. And in the words of Walter Scott, heap on more wood, the wind is chill, but let it whistle as it will. We'll keep our Christmas merry still.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've had quite a wet Christmas day, but the good news is that rain is clearing, and for Boxing Day it'll be much drier and brighter as this brief ridge of high pressure starts to build in. However, it doesn't last long before further weather systems move in as we head into Wednesday. So this evening time, rain still clearing the far southeast, some showery rain for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England for a time, but for the vast majority overnight it's dry with clear spells. Some wintry showers continue across northern parts of Scotland, some icy stretches here. Elsewhere, temperatures lower than they have been of late, but still fairly mild across southern counties of England and Wales. So it means a bright start to Boxing Day, plenty of sunny spells, a chilly start, icy stretches slowly melting away across parts of Scotland, and then for most a dry, bright day, plenty of hazy sunshine, though the cloud thickening from the southwest through into the afternoon, outbreaks of rain developing here. A fresher day for everyone, temperatures nearer to average 4 to 7 Celsius, mild air returning across the southwest. Then it's very unsettled on Wednesday. Outbreaks of heavy rain, strong winds push across the country, snow across the Scottish hills too, and temperatures remain well above average for the time of year. Some of that rain will be heavy at times, and it stays unsettled through Thursday and Friday. Further showery rain in places and temperatures above average.
That warm feeling inside.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB.